We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. So welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I am your host, Lisa Tickle, and this is Austra, and we are going to talk about some interesting subjects today. We had kind of a great pre-meeting talking about it. As always, I know, it's just so good. So the subject we're going to kind of talk about is that, excuse me, that period of time in your life, and we call it like a transition, and I like the other term you use, which is managing the change of when you're going from your old self and you're transitioning and you're creating that new self. And there's that space between there. And that is a really difficult time. And so we're going to kind of talk about that and what happens in that time and how to kind of manage it. And then there was a second part we were going to talk about, right?
Yeah, also, I think it would be valuable for us to touch on managing that uncertainty that comes with those transitions, because there's literally nothing is certain when you go through change or you go through transitions, because by default, when you change, you step into something new. So like with that, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what to expect.
Kind of predict what you.
Yeah,
exactly. So I love this topic. This is something that I probably think a lot on, especially as change itself is something or like transitions in life, they're so inevitable. That's the only thing that is literally guaranteed in life. There will be change, there will be transitions, and it doesn't matter whether they're intentional or not, because sometimes, like, that's one of the reasons why I like to do the stuff that I do to train my mind and like do some things to like develop my like resilience and stuff like that, because in my mind I am preparing myself for anything that can happen to at least be less kind of affected by it,
doesn't
in
take
like
you down.
negative ways, or be able to manage it better. Yeah, and a lot of it is kind of going through that, like practicing it. But change, there's also something that with transitions, I think it could be valuable also for us to touch on. One is going from old to new self, but also how to navigate as that happens, how to navigate the external and internal
messages and thoughts and feelings and emotions, and the outward experience,
and other people reacting to you changing.
Right, because that's true too. Exactly. And and honestly, I haven't found that this subject's talked about very much, but every single person that's going through any type of healing or any type of growth is going to go through this. And the first one I found was the hardest, because I didn't understand it and I didn't realize what was going on. And so it was the hardest, and it took me the longest to get through that first transition.
What was your first
It was
one?
A long time ago. And it was really probably after I had my first real taste of any kind of healing. It was really just the beginning. But then all of a sudden I found and one of the subjects that we talk about, one of the topics in this is loneliness. And that was definitely there. It was a period in time in my life too, where I was transitioning from like a teenager to an adult. So that can be a lonely place without having any kind of trauma, right? Because your life changes a lot when you go from high school into adult life. And so there's that transition. But I had begun my healing at 19, right? I had started searching out for getting this thing in me out, which I didn't realize was pain at the time, and to change how I was thinking. And so I can remember sitting on Friday nights and just being all alone and trying to navigate this. And that was the biggest thing for me. And the loneliness was a trigger for me because I had a lot of that as a child. So you could imagine how confusing that could have been, right? So I was affiliating that loneliness to that belief system that I had that nobody liked me. When in actuality, I was going through a transition of changing the type of friends and the type of life I was going to live. It was small. It was small changes because my changes back then were really small. But it was still a change.
Still
It was still a
changing.
change. It was still a change.
Which is another thing to address here is that small change doesn't mean that it's less of a
Correct.
change. Like it's, especially if it's small change that is
Right.
consistent, because those small changes, they do add up. But it's something that I see it so much where like a lot of times, and I have seen that in myself as well in the past, where and sometimes even in the present, about like the small changes where it's like, oh, but if it's not big enough, like it doesn't count. It's, or like having
Yeah.
those thoughts or those beliefs, instead of even acknowledging that I am taking steps towards change, which probably a year ago, 2 years ago, I wouldn't even
Right.
consider taking. So it's something to keep in mind that also when it comes to those steps, small steps are ideal because you can manage them.
And that's how most
Even
changes
that like
are,
transition, that
right? Most
unknown.
changes are going to be small steps, and that's okay. Those small steps add up really quick. If you're taking consistent small steps over a 6 month period, that's going to be
Oof.
huge.
But it's not
It's
advertised.
not advertised, and that's one of the things that can feel like it's frustrating, and that's why I often have told my clients and such that, just look back where you were 6 months ago. Look back where you were a year ago. If you've been making small steps or big steps or whatever, you're going to be a different person than you were a year ago. And sometimes we just need to do that. We need to look back and remember where we were at a year ago and where we're at today. And if you've been making steps, you are going to change, period.
Yeah, and also another thing that comes with change or transitions, especially if we have clarity on what we want that change to look like, and we might be falling off or we might not be succeeding at it like with the first attempt. Something to keep in mind is that when you start over, it's not like you're starting from day one, because or like starting from
Right.
ground zero, because what you take with you is all the experiences and all the lessons that you learned from the first attempt. And it's something that I see so much where even like in myself, when I was doing 75 hard, I would be like, oh, it doesn't count because I failed or whatever, and I wouldn't see how much progress I actually had made and how
Mm-hmm.
consistent I have been. I would just focus on that like one slip up or one thing that was like
Our
going wrong,
failures.
instead of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And also like, then another thing with that would be not judging yourself or beating yourself up for making less change than you would expect to make within the certain time frame, because it's like, oh, I've been doing this 6 months and I thought I will get this result, but I don't. And then you beat yourself up. Even like with my half Ironman prep, I'm like, oh, I should have been further by now. I have only 40 something days left. And actually, it's 30 something because last week you don't really train, you recover. And I just
Get in your
start to
head.
like, I start to see those patterns like coming up where it's like getting in my head. And I literally wouldn't even focus on the fact that like this past weekend I trained for 7 hours.
That
Like,
doesn't count.
and me, yeah, and like some time ago I actually would not see that, but I was even thinking about it today. I was like, there was a time that I wouldn't even consider doing the level of exercise I did in that day, or not even consider. I just physically wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to do
Yeah.
that. So I'm already winning. And that's where like through navigating change single time, what you will do is, and that's also something to keep in mind, like that change, it's repetitive, it's always happening. But every single time you will also adjust your mindset when it comes to things not going well or things not going in accordance with your
Mm-hmm.
expectations or stuff like that, where you learn to navigate that as well and you focus more on the what's going well, which can help also with any change or transition in general, because a lot of times we jump to the negatives of what we lose. Even like with, let's say, healing, there's a lot that you can actually lose, even though it might not be good for you, but you lose even like being able to point fingers or
Yeah.
blame people,
Yeah.
or playing
Mm-hmm.
victim or not taking responsibility. You lose all of that as you step more into like healing and growing and
Mm-hmm.
improving yourself. You actually lose a lot, and that's something that we don't consciously focus on that, but it is something that can affect you as well. And instead of doing that, focus more on that sense of like, I'm empowered, I'm more in
Mm-hmm.
charge, I'm making my own decisions, I actually have more control over more things in my life, or I have more that sense that I
Right.
have that control, and focusing on that instead of things that we're losing or what we can't be
Right.
anymore.
Right. The expectations is a huge thing. And that's something that
Oh
you
yeah,
really, I'm learning in my life that you really need to pay attention to and really be careful of, because
and they're very
they
sneaky.
are so sneaky. They are so sneaky. And expectations, I forget what the exact, the way they explained it, but expectations, it gets you in trouble, especially unspoken expectations. But when it comes to ourselves, we have to be really careful. So,
Here's the definition of
okay, yeah.
expectations, just in case. A strong belief that something will happen or be
Yeah,
the case.
yeah, yeah, whatever that is, exactly. Well, we put a list together of some of the things that you go through as you're in this transition period in your life, and you get some really great ones, and then I added a few to it. But these are just some. So the one we touched on already, which is loneliness and isolation, right? You feel isolated. And we're going to talk about these, but I also want to touch on how we can kind of work through them too, so we're not stuck here.
Yeah.
People pleasing, dealing with or navigating how people around you respond to your change. That could be a whole podcast. Uncertainty, dealing
Yep.
with the unknown, with entertaining new, unfamiliar levels of healing and growth. How to navigate not being settled in your situation yet. That's a good one. Getting anxious.
Mm.
Managing expectations, which we just touched on. Being okay with a mess, failing at things, and falling back and falling back throughout the transition phase. That's a good one. Negative self-talk, because we touched on that too. We already touched on that one.
Mm.
The imposter syndrome, which is feeling like a fraud or doubting one's ability despite evidence of success. So that's a
Oh
big one.
yeah.
And then loss of identity, because you're losing your old identity.
Yes, like identity crisis that
Yes,
you go through.
and you're creating your new identity, and so that alone, of course, we could have a podcast on that alone. That is unsettling right there, because that's when you start hearing in your head, "Who am I? What do I like? What you know?" I remember that was in 2016, and I had my identity crisis.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about
Yeah,
these. Okay, so maybe we can just go through
yeah,
like one at
yeah,
a time, starting with
yeah.
the loneliness. Can you talk a bit on like your experience? You kind of touched on it about like dealing with loneliness, and maybe what was your, as you navigated more and more transitions, because you already touched on the first one. How did that sense of loneliness change over time?
So over time, when I'm going to talk about a little more further down in my healing journey, because it was a long time before I kind of got this part of it. And once I realized I was in this phase, so there was the self-awareness of realizing I'm in this place, that I can't go back to what I used to do, but I don't know what my new part is yet. And feeling lonely,
Mm.
because in that time I had to let go of some relationships, for various reasons. And so, yeah, you're going to get lonely. But what I realized is that I started looking at my future, and I started looking at what I wanted that to look like, and the people that I wanted to have in my life. And part of healing that loneliness in me was creating the relationship with myself. So I began to really, in that healing part there, I started uh, building a relationship with myself that I never had at all. And in that, I started to learn about the things that I like and who I am, and accepting them, good, whether they look good or bad. And so that was a big thing. So when I began to build the relationship with myself, that opened up the door for me to start having new healthy relationships. And so you and I touched on
Mm.
this in the past, but where I'm at now is I don't get lonely. I enjoy my time alone. I enjoy my time with my family and friends and loved ones. but I'm never lonely anymore, honestly. So that's how I was able to manage that for myself. And I think that that would be true for anybody, that transition period is you are learning about yourself, and you should be learning about yourself. You should be selfish, if you want to call it that. And you should be focusing on yourself and figuring out what you want that future to look like.
I'm even like thinking, because for me right now, it doesn't feel
Mm-mm.
selfish, kind of having time with myself or spending. But there might have been time when I felt like it was selfish, and I'm thinking like, what was the transition there? Because especially with me, like coming from a background with like people pleasing, if there's association with being selfish when I'm spending time with myself, let's say, or I'm saying no to somebody just to spend time with myself, or just because I don't feel like going and meeting or whatever, I literally would have so much kind of
Yeah.
judgment or negative emotions
Mm-hmm.
around it, where I would now associate being alone with something negative instead of something positive. And I'm just thinking like, what is something that can help anybody listening that might have that sense of what you said, like being selfish when they are spending time with themselves, which also there's a big difference spending time by yourself and with
True.
yourself.
True.
There's a difference. What could help them to maybe navigate or change their association with that?
Oh, that's a good one, because that one did.
Because I feel like that could be a barrier to actually spending time with yourself and getting
Yeah,
to know
because it was a
yourself.
long time before I got to that place, where I didn't,
Mm.
and what I really, I think what helped me, and I don't know if this will, I know this will help some of the listeners. What helped me in that area was realizing that I'm not a big social person. That I have
Mm.
anxiety when it comes to big social engagements or any social engagement. And so what I was doing, part of the reason why I was feeling guilty too, is I was committing to this stuff, and I really meant it at the time. I really meant that I wanted to go, and I committed to whatever it was. But as the time got closer, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was getting anxiety. And then I would back out
Yeah.
sometimes. And then because I had a belief system that people didn't like me, it wasn't a big deal that I wasn't going. And then I still would feel
Mm.
guilty. And I had to figure out, and I rightfully felt guilty on that one, because I was canceling on someone, and it wasn't it, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't okay how I was handling it, but I just didn't know what was going on, so I didn't know how to handle it properly. So once I realized that for
Mm.
me, I'm not a big, huge social person. I love being social with people, but I have got to have my downtime, and that's okay, because in order for me to
I was about to
yeah,
say
and
that.
because in order for me to have that social time, in order for me to have a healthy life, I've got to have that alone time. So I don't feel guilty, because I know that when I'm spending my time alone and I'm doing the stuff for me, it's going to energize me, and it's going to give me the strength to go out and be with others and help others. So does that kind of answer the question? That's what worked for me.
Yeah. And it's also like, even like with you walking through that example, you can show the importance of getting to know yourself and what is it that you like. Um, and also listening to that and respecting that and actually acting on that. So if you know that you like to spend more time alone, it's not a bad thing. I was
Mm-mm.
even like thinking as you were speaking, like at what point has it become
I
like a
know.
bad thing to spend time with yourself? Like what is so bad
That's a
about
great
it?
question. You're right. I didn't even think about it. You're right.
Or why do we try to like avoid it
Yeah.
or
Well,
kind of not, well, there's probably more answers there, but even like with that being a bad thing, it's like it's not a bad thing, like it's actually in my eyes even
as long
necessary.
as you're doing healthy stuff in that time that you're spending alone, because you just made a comment
Mm.
about, say it again, where it's not, it's, say it, what was that comment you made? It's not
With yourself, by
right,
yourself.
right, right. So if you're here by yourself, that's a lonely place. But you here, if you're here with
Yeah, sitting in
yourself,
your phone and
you know
yeah, and initially being with yourself can
it's
be,
uncomfortable.
it can be a bit, yeah, uncomfortable, scary, because then you also see things that you have been trying to avoid seeing, and looking at them, and or they might just like come up and you're like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
I was really trying not to look at that or see that, but even like with that loneliness, I think for me it also was that loneliness in a sense of, because like as you work on yourself, you do start a change, which is like, I feel like it's several points in the discussion that kind of can relate to this. And as you're like changing, you start to not fit into other people's
Right.
perspectives of you. And even like with that, your perspective of you,
Oh, yeah. We should
and
transition
there
to
can be a
that.
level of loneliness. Yeah, because that's something that, as
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about loneliness, I know that for me one piece was, it wasn't even like, one piece of it is you being like kind of by yourself when it's just like you alone, but the other piece is like I would be even like school or whatever growing up around people or like my teammates, and I would still feel
Mm-hmm.
lonely. And big part of it was because I just felt
Mm-hmm.
different. I just felt not understood by, and it would be reinforced by certain, I don't know, situations where, I don't know, like I wouldn't go to
Right.
party, and people respond to that or they react to that, and through that reaction, and I'll start to feel
Right.
more lonely, or I start to feel like, oh, I don't fit in, or I'm different, and that could reinforce that loneliness. And I feel like in my case it was, I actually don't know what it was, because I was like people pleaser, but I didn't do something that didn't feel like me. Like similar to you, like I am not big like social gathering, tons
Mm-mm.
of people kind of person. Rarely I do that. Like I went to Tony Robbins event and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But if it's like regular, like a lot of people, I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
give me
No, no,
space.
no, no.
um, and like that's it feels like it's authentically me, at least at the level of growth that I'm at now. Maybe more levels above, there's another layer of me
Right.
loving that. But where I'm at right now, that's kind of where I'm at. And that's where like if I would not go to some events or something like that, I think my loneliness came from the place of like feeling like I just
Mm-hmm.
don't fit in, and I didn't really know where I actually
Mm-hmm.
fitted in. So that's where like I feel like for me was, and a lot of it was like more so external, because I think within there was a lot of like low self-esteem, even like self-hate probably, or like
Oh, yeah.
judging myself. So it wasn't probably too great being around
No,
myself.
no.
But still, like it's something that I feel like that, similar to everything, the more time we spend with ourselves, or force ourselves to spend with ourselves initially, the more we get to know ourselves to the level where, and I know you have mentioned this like several episodes, where you literally become your
Mm-hmm.
best friend. You actually like
Mm-hmm.
to be like around yourself. You look forward to the time that you're gonna be
Mm-hmm.
alone, just
Mm-hmm.
doing your thing, you know. But it is a process, and in my case, it wasn't like a few weeks process. It was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. And and for me, the reason, and then I don't want the listeners to think, oh, it's going to take forever, it's going to take years. So much of my healing process took a long time because there wasn't this information out there that I'm putting out on my
And
podcast, and all
support, yeah.
the great trauma therapy that's out there now, and the modalities that they have out there now to help. And so my process, I had to do it on my own, and had to kind of figure it out,
Yeah, just
just
trying
trying
to
to
figure
figure
it
it out.
out.
And there was a lot of hit and misses. And so I want the listeners to know that
Yes, I'm.
we're putting this out there to help shorten your suffering and to help you work through this so that you're not suffering all those years, that you can work through it. And so, yeah, and the same thing for you.
Yeah, and also for me, one thing that I wanted to touch on here is that for me also it was, resources might have been there, but I had so much
Well, yeah,
shame
there's that.
and so much fear of actually reaching out for help, that it took me a while to even overcome that and admit to others, well, initially to myself, that actually I feel like I need help. I need to get some kind of guidance or reach out to, even if it's like some resources or some courses or some mentors or whatever, but actually being able to be open to receive
Yeah,
help
yeah,
took a
yeah,
while to even like
yeah,
get there.
yeah. I know.
Yeah, you were
No,
saying
I
something.
finished it, and then it was I don't remember because I felt like I finished it, but yeah, I mean the shame, especially, and that's why I like to talk about this stuff too, because the shame keeps our mouth closed and keeps those crazy thoughts, and I call them crazy because they are crazy, in our head, and making us think things about ourselves that's not true. And so when we start sharing this stuff,
Yep.
my hope is that people will go, oh, okay, I can identify with that. I actually think like that too. So I'm not crazy. It comes from my trauma, or it comes from this, and I can overcome
Yeah.
it. I can learn to manage it. Like there's hope. There's hope. But shame likes
Yeah,
to
and
shut
also
that
we give
down.
space. One example that comes in my mind is about my marathon running, where I thought that I was waiting for people to tell me like, "Aren't you too fat
Gosh.
to run?" And
And nobody
and
did
like,
that.
and I remember I was nobody, and I was like, so people are afraid to even like call me out. Like that is my
Oh,
thought. Um,
God.
and then like what happened? What happened was like when I asked my friend, and she said me that like I didn't even consider it. My thought was like you're probably gonna be
Right.
busier or like less available, stuff like that. Um, and through that, I one thing that the point there is that when I would communicate to that, then also you give, assuming that it's the kind of the right person to talk with
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
whatever the
It's a safe
topic,
space.
through their feedback in real time, you can instantly see how ridiculous, like in my mind, I'm like, it would feel so real all those months with
Yep.
me preparing. I'm just like, so when is
I'm just
somebody
waiting
going to
for
call
it.
me out? And like nobody did. I'm like, oh, so they're afraid to like confront me or like whatever. um and then like when actually and that's also like we create these like mind
Yeah.
scripts about what's going to happen or whatever based on our like limited beliefs or perceptions or stuff like that. And then once, sometimes the only way we can challenge them is actually, if not a lot of times, is to communicate them and get them out. And then especially if it's like a safe
Yeah.
person for you, then they can communicate back to you that it didn't even cross my
Right.
mind, or that's not the way it is. And then if you have not only one person but you have several people giving you that feedback, that's when you can be like, oh, maybe there is something that I'm missing
Mm-hmm.
here. So like it's something that it's all those like thoughts, they are really tricky, and they a lot of times they come from your
Yeah.
background where they're so sneaky because they have been. And that's a big thing about change, is like even like touching slightly on that identity, because like that has been such a strong, even like let's say for me, limiting beliefs about my running or weight or stuff like that. They have been like such a strong belief that I didn't even think to challenge them. And even
Mm-hmm.
now, like when I am actually challenging them and changing them, they still pop
Mm-hmm.
up and they're like, what about me? Even like I was thinking about it the other day, how even like that the workout that I did on Saturday, which took almost 7 hours, I was like, if there's anybody who would tell me that if they're out of shape, or let's say overweight or slightly overweight, if they would tell me that, oh, I can't do it because of my weight or whatever, I would tell them like, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I did it. And that's where like I can help them to confront their
Mm-hmm.
limiting beliefs. Because for me, I would whenever I would look online, I would see everybody in like peak shape, six pack, and like they're proper like athlete level fit. I'm not that. I can't relate to that. Not with where I'm at right now. And even like through going through this journey, that's where I can see that that will give me opportunity to connect with people who might want to challenge themselves, but they might have limiting beliefs similar to the ones that
Mm-hmm.
I had. And in this case, not only I can talk about it and tell them like, oh, you can do it, but I can tell them like, I'm actually have been doing that. I actually have challenged them. I didn't wait until I would get to certain weight.
Right.
It's rhyming. To start to do something, which for me was like a big block. I would be like, oh, I can't do this because I'm out
Mm-hmm.
of shape or I'm not there yet. Now I'm like, it actually like it's not really it's not conscious
Mm-hmm.
thought, and it's not something that in reality is holding me back. And it's something to keep in mind about change, that change actually, and this is one of the points that I don't think we have in there, but change actually might surprise you in a good
Oh
ways
yeah,
as
it
well.
usually does. It usually does.
Yeah, and it's and the more you change and the more you go through those transitions, especially the ones that are serving you and the ones that are
Mm-hmm.
intentional, the ones that life throws at you, that's different kind of thing to navigate or different kind of approach. But if you intentionally work on yourself and you put yourself in situations that will help you to heal or to grow and to get better, you might actually surprise
Mm-hmm.
yourself
Mm-hmm.
in a good way with things that you're capable of, or level of growth that you can
Mm-hmm.
achieve in relatively short amount of time when you intentionally take those steps and you intentionally stick with it, even if you don't feel like it's going well, or you actually don't like the
Yeah.
process and there's like resistance. But you might actually surprise yourself that there's some good that can come with that
Mm-hmm.
change as well. I know that it's the case for me, where like there's been a lot of uncomfortable steps that I had to
Oh yeah.
take, but on the other end, and that's also something that people can keep in mind, you just want to focus on making yourself proud.
Yes. And your comparison,
That's
if
a
you're going to do
big thing for
comparisons,
me.
compare yourself. So compare yourself from 6 months ago
Yep.
or a year ago. That's what I do. It's not fair to compare yourself and your situation to somebody else's. It's just not fair. Unless you both have
Yeah.
walked the same exact journey, you can't compare
Just
yourself
not
to
possible.
somebody else. It's just not fair. You're not being fair to yourself,
Yeah.
frankly.
Or if you do, then look at the energy or intentions behind it. So if you compare to inspire
Mm-hmm.
yourself, or you look at somebody, like that's something that I aspire to be to others, where people can look at me and they can think, if she did it, I
Mm-hmm.
also can do it. So if you look at it from that kind of perspective, it can serve you. But if it's more so like to look at, oh, like she did it and I can't
Right.
because that's not the that's where like it's better to just compare yourself to
Right.
yourself, because that is not serving you
No,
in any
no. I
way.
mean, because if you think about it, if I sit here and like, for example, I walk into a room and I see a beautiful woman and I think, oh, she's so much prettier than me. And I start going down the list of things that's wrong with me. How's that going to make me feel? As opposed to how I walk into a room now and I see a beautiful woman and I admire her and I try to learn something from her instead of being,
And you also, I feel like with admiring her, you also give yourself more space to admire
yeah.
yourself,
Yeah, because I don't walk into a room,
because that's also what
I
you
don't walk
focus
into a
on.
room and feel a loss, right? I don't walk into
Mm.
a room, I actually walk into a room and feel like I'm gaining something. It's an opportunity. I'm saying this right now and I'm blowing my own mind because it's a reality that I didn't, I mean, I knew I had made that change in my life, but to say it out loud like that is really powerful because I don't have a jealousy of other. And if it ever does come up, I immediately go to, okay, what's going on in me? There's something going on in me that
Oh
has
yeah,
stirred
yeah.
that up, right?
Which is another really really important piece in
Right.
anything really, and you talk about it probably in every episode.
Yeah,
Awareness.
self-awareness. Yeah.
When it comes to navigating change and
Yeah.
transitions, awareness
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
huge.
We have to have self-awareness for any of our healing or any of our growth. Absolutely. Self-awareness is our friend.
Is there something that people listening can do to improve it? Just like quick tips to make it more practical,
Um,
or what's been helping you?
well, what's helping me is actually slowing down because I move really fast. And
Mm.
and I've done that all my life. And so one thing is I have to slow down, right? And that helps me stop, and that helps me to not
Mm.
react, and that helps me to slow down and give me the space that I need to go. Okay, wait, what's going on? Because if I'm anymore, I'm to the place where I'm pretty in tune with my body. And if I start feeling stuff, I'm like, that's what'll bring up my self awareness.
Yeah, it's like a sign for you to actually
What's
stop and
going
look
on? What's
within.
going on? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
One thing that
I was just going to say,
yeah,
so
go ahead.
just give yourself space, slow down, and breathing is a huge thing because breathing is going to make you slow down.
Yeah. Few things that I have seen that help me and like even some people that I have worked with. Two things that come in mind is like one is
Yeah.
journaling. And even like with journaling, it's not even anything
Right.
specific. Um, literally with you just sitting down and writing out what is happening in your mind, what you do is you literally do what you just said. You slow down, but you slow down your mind, because your mind has to be able to follow along, or like as you write, you don't write as
Oh
fast as you
no.
think, so you
Yeah.
naturally slow
Yes.
down.
True.
And through slowing down, that's when you're able to
Right.
actually see, and that's when you can see what is it that might need
Right.
to be addressed, or something that comes up that you're like, oh, this is something. It's so like, for me, there was a time when I was what is it, I was like chasing those awakening moments, or like when light
Yeah.
bulb
Those are fun.
happens, and I would like, let's say I'm, yeah, it's
Yeah.
especially the
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
ones. And I would like, and not even good ones, it's just something like you find something finally clicks, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this because, oh my gosh, how did I not
Yes.
see? And it's not even how did I not see it where I beat myself up, but it's like I'm happy that I found this
Yeah.
like link that now it kind of gives me better idea or the picture of the puzzle. That's like the first thing. Journaling is really, really helpful. And there's like, you can use some prompts as well, but just journaling whatever's in your mind can be helpful, or any situation that might be frustrating you. But then like another piece is reflection.
Hmm.
So even like doing daily reflection, where at the end of the day, you write down like what went well, what I don't write what went bad. I write what was kind of meh,
Yeah. What could I improve
like, yeah.
upon, or what could I do
Um,
different, or something,
yeah,
or
and
what did I learn? Hmm.
yeah, what I
Hmm.
learned also is a good one. And then also like, what can I let go?
Ooh. Ooh.
Like what happened today that I
Oh,
just
that's
can
a
let
good.
go,
That's a
whether
really
it's like
good one.
emotion or some or a thought. And a lot of times it gives you like a chance to think on something that, what is it that I can let
Hmm.
go? And the more you do that, the more you also practice being less attached to
Yeah.
certain things, which also really important with
Yeah.
navigating change. Because with navigating change, there's so much letting go that needs
Yes.
to be happening, literally at the identity
Yeah.
level as well. And
Yeah.
relationships. There's so many things that can happen that we need to be
True.
letting go as we
Yeah.
navigate through change. So even like through doing this, that's something that like I I would usually communicate it to people, where even like with you doing this, it's like it's similar to what we talked about, small changes. Well, it's not what is this going to do? Like I just write what I will let go of today. But what you're doing, you're training your muscle of letting go. And same thing with even like when I talk about resilience and discipline and all this kind of stuff with cold showers. It's like cold shower, like I just don't want to do it or whatever. But you train resilience and toughness by doing things you
Hmm.
don't want to do. Cold shower being
Hmm.
one of them. Most people, they don't want, I still don't want to do that. I feel good afterwards, but then when it comes to doing it, I'm like, "Ah, do I really have to do it?" And then the more you do it, the more you literally, like every time when you turn it to cold, you train yourself to
Yeah.
intentionally get uncomfortable. And that becomes like a muscle when you, and it's a skill that you can transfer to real life. It doesn't stop at the
Right.
shower. That's the best thing about it. um, and it's the same here with letting go. And also another thing that I'm trying to do this more consistently myself as well. And I tell people to do this, especially if you know that you focus a lot on the
Yeah.
negative, which a lot of times we do, especially if you have some like
Hmm.
trauma background, you probably do even
Hmm.
more so because you're looking out for like any threats. Um, is to write down like 3 wins of the day or 3 good things that happened today. And it's similar
Yeah. I
also
was
to
gonna say
gratitude.
writing down things that you're grateful for. Yeah.
Yeah. And you train yourself on your mind to look
Right.
for the good, to look for the good, look for the good. And it doesn't stop at just looking at your day, because then if you do this long enough and consistent enough, now you start to go into life and you start
Hmm.
to actually look more for the good instead of the bad. So you're slowly starting to kind of like rewire your brain or what you focus on. And with that, probably perception as
Right.
well. But these are, I feel like these could be quite helpful with like
Hmm.
awareness, probably even more than awareness, but seeing things within yourself is pretty much impossible without awareness. And with that, also navigating change without awareness is, ooh, it can be so much bigger mess emotionally than if you have that awareness or some tools that you can use to
Hmm.
navigate it. But yeah, so Maybe we can talk on people
Oh
pleasing,
yeah,
even like mentioning on letting go, and you mentioned some relationships as well. It's
yeah,
if
people pleasing.
well,
Yeah.
maybe we can combine together. Like I feel like they go together: people pleasing and dealing with and navigating how people
Oh,
around you
totally.
respond to you
Yeah,
changing.
yeah, because you can get
Yeah.
yourself in a loop, in a cycle, which I did for years. Of I was so and the root of my people pleasing came from nobody likes me, from that belief, right? And so I had to get them to
Um,
like me, right?
like it was
Oh,
your
it
job.
100% was my job. And so my job was to go around and make sure you're happy and that you like me. And in that, I also,
Was it also why you had
I was, you're
chameleon
just gonna, yeah, that's where, right where I
you
was
working
going
with?
is why I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
I was proud of the fact that I was a chameleon because I could change myself.
Even
I
proud.
truly was. I thought, oh, people will like me and I get along with everybody because I come along and I become who I think you want me to be.
Wow. Okay, I have an interesting follow up question here. So, with you being proud with being what the other person wanted you to be, where does your relationship with yourself stand in that kind
There
of
is none.
scenario?
So when I was in this place, I
Mm.
didn't have a relationship with myself. This was back in the day when, the people pleasing was, I'll admit, it was hard to break. And it's still there and I have to manage it. But there was no relationship with myself because my goal, remember, my mindset and my goal in this people pleasing was I had to get you to like me, which meant I would buy you things. I would do things for you. I would, even if there was something in our relationship that wasn't right, I would set it aside, even if it was a red flag, because I had to have you in my life.
Yeah.
I couldn't have another person walk away. So my people pleasing went to extremes of definitely not taking care of myself. It didn't matter what I wanted, didn't matter what I liked. And I always had that
Yeah.
same ending thought in my head of, oh, well, this is going to end up, they're going to walk away. They're going to end up walking away anyway. So it was a really ugly
One,
place.
I'm thinking how okay, so with this, how did you navigate changes then? How does the people pleasing affected you navigating changes
It
or
slowed things
transitions in
down. It slowed things down a lot. And what ended up happening
mm,
for me to really, um, actually, what it took some things in my life to really shake me up and to get my
mhm.
attention because I wasn't. Otherwise, I was going to just keep going down that road. I was just going to stay in that place. So I had some events that happened in my life that um, really stripped me down, and I had to rebuild it. So the people pleasing though was
Mm.
still there, and until I worked through that wrong belief that nobody liked me, that was the thing that was a big one because I had that one since I
Oh
was
yeah.
11.
And it was
It
really
was very
strong
strong, and it affected
identity
every
level strong.
part of my life, and it affected everybody in my life. And I don't have regrets about it because I didn't know what I didn't know. Right? I can change things and move forward and do things different. Um, but yeah, it was really for me getting that belief out that helped me be able to get traction to work through the process I needed to come to the point of not always having to get everybody to like me. That my job isn't to get you to
Mm.
like me. My job is to be me.
And if you don't like it,
Exactly. I mean,
not the
frankly,
person for you.
yeah. I wasn't going to say that, but I want to say that.
What helped you to what helped you to accept that scenario? Because that from where you were might have seemed
Oh gosh, I
really
would have. Yeah,
extreme
no, that was very
scenario.
extreme. From let me think about that because I guess you know, just healing that part of me. Um, and I also because even when I was before I had really come to that place of cutting that off and not being a people pleaser, I was still watching myself go through that cycle, right? And that
Mm.
same, and I was like, I hate this. And I kept getting hurt. I kept getting hurt, but it was my own fault because I was staying in relationships that clearly were not good for me and probably not for them, right? And I got tired of that.
Yeah.
You're really making me think today. Seriously, because this is good that we're dissecting this when you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, I did do that.
Yeah, because people are going through
Yeah.
that. There are people that
And
are
then
going through this.
when you slow me down and I think about the steps, it's really interesting. But that is really what happened, is that I got tired of working so hard to stay in relationships with people who I shouldn't be in a relationship with.
They weren't even
No,
fulfilling. Yeah.
no,
You literally
I
got
got
nothing
nothing. I
from it.
actually, it stole my energy. It was taking from me. It was taking from me. And, it's like, there's a person I can think of right now. And, the person in my life, I knew her since I was a little girl, and she became an alcoholic. And it got to be where every conversation we had was just, it wasn't a healthy, normal conversation. It wasn't healthy, loving conversation. And so you get to a point, and I remember I was getting off the phone angry every time, angry. And I was angry, like, why
Mm.
can't we just have a normal relationship? She's an alcoholic. That's why. She's an alcoholic. I can't have a relationship with her. I can't help her. And I can't have her coming into my life, because she was coming into my life and, well, she was sucking energy, but she was interfering in my life, I guess is a better way to say it. She was
Mm.
overstepping and crossing over boundaries with me.
Like there was no
Not at all.
respect
Not at all.
towards.
And so that was like one of the really first ones where I went, I got to cut this relationship off. And that was hard. That was a lifelong relationship I had with this person. But when I slowed down,
So how did you navigate
so what
that?
I did is, what made me realize it is that I really needed to cut it off because of where I was at, is I stepped back and I slowed down and I looked at the entire relationship. And frankly, the entire relationship was like that since I was a kid. It was always unhealthy.
The power of
Whoa,
reflection.
I'm like, what am I getting? And it's not that it's like I have to get something from this relationship, right? But relationships are give and
Yeah, yeah.
take. And there was no give towards me.
Mutual. Mutual.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a conversation with her, and we lived in different states, so it would have to be over the phone. And I couldn't get her when she was sober. She was never sober. She
Mm.
was never sober. And I ended up finally writing her a letter. I wrote her a letter, and that's not always the best case scenario, but if I would try to have a conversation with, I mean, if you've ever had to try to have a conversation with someone who's drunk, it's quite frustrating, and you're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to be a healthy it's not going to be a healthy conversation.
Yeah.
And so, I wrote it truly from my heart. It wasn't any, oh, you're an alcoholic and you're this. It was really from my heart that we are just in different places in our life, and I love you and I wish you the best. And if you need me to help you, I left the door open. But that was the first one. And that was the one that kind of gave me momentum and reflect on the rest of my
Mm.
relationships and my people pleasing, and the fact that I was proud of being a chameleon.
Yeah, even like with the people pleasing, there can, I feel like for me, there was a piece. Well, initially, a lot of it was coming from a place of me not feeling like I'm
Yeah.
good enough or stuff like that. So I would help people. And then whenever I would get like thanks, I would be like, oh, I'm good enough,
Oh,
kind of thing.
I get that
Um,
one. Oof.
like it's, and I wasn't like fully aware of it, but like I would think that I'm somebody who is like always helping others, but a lot of it was like coming selfishly, me trying to
Yes.
feel that sense of not
Yeah.
being enough. And that's why I was always like available and always like helpful and all this kind of stuff, which like similar to you, I completely neglected myself and my wants, needs, like and anything, like I
Yeah.
just neglected that. And actually, like as you were speaking, one thing that I wrote down next to people pleasing when it comes to navigating change is that it can keep you stuck.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Good
and
point. Yes.
and that's something that as I'm reflecting on my like experiences with different kind of changes or transitions that I have had, people pleasing has been something that it's like related to that, people that might, or like navigating other people around you, how they kind of react to you
Mm-hmm.
changing. That's been like really hard for me to let go of certain like
Yeah.
relationships, not being able, like, in some ways through that people pleasing, like caring too
Mm-hmm.
much. But you care like too much, and this is something that you said to me, that you need to care more for yourself than others or their opinions. And that is something that, like, anybody listening, I want you to hear that, because as much of, especially people
Mm-hmm.
pleasers out
Yeah.
there,
There's a lot of us.
because I know all of you, you feel resistance and you're like, no, 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 I can't do that. I hear you. I know the feeling. But even like with that, it's something that, even that reflection where you sit down and you think about, and this is actually what you said, like I call it relationship audit. And I started it a few years ago, kind of out of nowhere. I think I was supposed to meet one of my friends who last minute canceled or something like that. And that's when I was like, okay, it was like close to New Year's, and I was like, maybe I could do this like kind of relationship reflection audit kind of thing. And I had no guidance on thing. I just sit down and I wrote down the list of people that I found like valuable in my life, or that I would like look at, oh, I would want to like continue a relationship with these people. And then with each of them, I would literally think on like, just reflect on relationship, and I could start to see how the give and take ratio was insanely off. Like with, I would say maybe one or two people, it was like
Mm-hmm.
good. The rest of the people, it was so off. And I would, that's when I became aware. I think the thing started to click for me with the people pleasing, where I was like, oh my gosh, like I knew I'm a people pleaser, but I thought I'm like not there anymore. And then I could see how I'm actually like people pleasing so much that you're so used to giving, 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 not receiving. Then when somebody gives something back, I look at it as, oh my gosh, like they're a great friend. They gave something
Yes.
back, but it's literally
Yes.
crumbles compared to whatever I'm giving. And I would focus on that instead of how much I'm giving and how little I'm receiving. I would just focus on this one thing that
Yeah.
I'm actually like
Yeah.
receiving. And through that, like it's something that with navigating change, people pleasing is something that, because there will be, even like when you navigate, especially when it comes to changing yourself, you will need to be more selfish to give yourself more time and attention to actually go within, work on yourself. You need to find time for
Yeah.
that. And with that, naturally, you will have to say no to things. And a lot of times it might be saying no to people. Not fully in a place where you now cut them
Right.
off, but even like setting boundaries with, you know what, this is the season that I am working on myself. This is what I'm working on, and I might be less available or something. Even communicating that, it can be so hard because we, especially people pleasers, it's like we don't want to
Disappoint.
be inconvenienced or not be
Yes.
available or anything like that. We care too much about what people think. And like through that, that can itself be a really big thing to learn, or like, and it takes practice. It's not like one that, because people treat us the way we teach them. So if you're always available, they will always come to you. And that's something that I have gone through, where now I'm seemingly, there's limited amount of people that I'm always available for, like really quickly. But the rest of the people, it's not as quick. And it's just managing. It doesn't mean that I'm unavailable. If there's any emergency, I'm always available. But if I make people think that I'm always available, then they get
Right.
expectation that I'm always available, and then I disappoint them, and then we have some conflicts,
Yeah.
or all the expectations are not met, and you kind of go
Rabbit
down that
hole. Yep.
rabbit
Yep.
hole.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and but like that, people, your people pleasing, and also people outside of you, that can be one of the hardest things to navigate when it
Yeah.
comes to change or
Yeah.
transitions, because especially like what you mentioned, like
Yeah.
lifelong
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
because with that you probably also let go part of your identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And and there's the thing, and I think a lot of survivors deal with is, abandonment issues, right? And so
Oh yeah.
in that people pleasing pool
And
is, well,
loneliness.
I can't look, I've got this small pool of people that like me, and so I can't lose any of them. So I have to continue to be a people pleaser so that I can continue to have this pool of people, even though in this pool of people, there's probably a good percentage of them that aren't good for me, right? That we aren't, it's not a healthy relationship between us.
Yeah, and again, like similar to what you said, like I wouldn't even think about what's good for
No,
me.
no, not at all. No, I'm just hanging on to these people.
I still need reminders
I
to
know.
think
And,
about
and, and that's,
that.
and in all this, what I wanted to share with the listeners too is this is something that you are going to have to face in the transition of healing and growing. And that is, you are probably going to lose people in your life, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Um, the first one is the hardest. Losing the first one is the hardest. But as you are healing and you are creating that relationship with yourself, I don't want to say it becomes easier, but you understand the importance of it, and so you're able to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you become
You
more
become more able.
able.
It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that it's not difficult, because it is. You're losing somebody who is somebody important in your life for a season. And now you can't have them. That was before I wrote the letter to her, I lost a lot of nights sleep, and I did go through that whole thing of, oh my gosh, she literally had been my friend since I was 7, and we were close
Yeah,
for
and in some
years.
ways you have that sense of like
Yes,
obligation as
yeah.
well that
And
comes
then,
with it.
she's an alcoholic. And then because I was a people pleaser and an enabler, I thought I could help. But, you can't help. First of all, I am not equipped to help an alcoholic, and so that was off the table. But it was just like,
And also, like with you being in a relationship, you're too emotionally involved in it as
totally
well,
way too
probably.
involved. And so that was hard. And but it's important, because the bottom line is, you will get to the point in your life where you are going to want to have the like-minded people in your life, and it's a give and take. It's not just what it does for me, and not just what I can do for them. It's a give and
Yeah.
take. And you will have those people. Like, I still have people in my life that I've had in my life for a long time. I still do. But I also have more people in my life that are more like-minded than me, that I get to share my life with.
And also, one thing that I want to add here is that sadly, it's not like that the right people will come in your life and then you let go of the old people. You need to let go of the
Yeah.
old people to free up
Yes.
space for new and better aligned people to
Yeah.
come in your life, and they won't come in the next day. So there might be that no man's
Yeah.
land to
That
navigate
loneliness.
in between. Yeah, and that there can be like really strong loneliness there, or even like that sense of like being completely alone.
And that's where the relationship with yourself is
But
important, because what made me think
yeah,
that is the person I was then. And I am not saying this as like I'm talking bad about other people at all. But the people back then, when I was not healthy and I was in survival mode and I was dealing with all that, had the same mindset as me, right? Because that's who I'm attracting,
yeah.
right? So they are in that same place. And so
And you're also so
I'm very
familiar with
familiar
that.
with that. And so when you go through that transition of, now I'm going to move in, I want to move into that area. I don't want to be in this place anymore. And that space in between is, that's why it's so lonely. But you can't identify with these guys anymore. And you are not going to grow if you are continuing to have yourself around people who don't want to grow, who don't want to heal, right? You're not going to be able to grow and heal. And so there has to be a point in
Yeah.
time, and there has to be a space between that time of your life and that new life that you're creating, where you're building that relationship with yourself, so that you understand about yourself, you take care of yourself, and then the people that will come into your life are going to be just like that. They're going to be like-minded. They're going to understand that. They're not going to give you a guilt trip because you want to go and take a nap. They're not going to, they're not going to make you feel guilty because you're
Yeah.
like, I can't do lunch today. I really need to have some. They're going to understand, right?
Yeah. And even like with that, another note that I can add here is because like as you heal, as you grow, there are unpleasant parts about the journey, but there also are those moments when you're like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. You start to see how
Yeah.
you're getting better, and and we have sometimes kind of unconsciously this expectation for others to come with us,
Yes.
people that are close to us, and that can be really painful thing to
Yeah.
navigate as well. Not only that letting go piece, but also those people not being in a place where they can or want to come with you, and navigating
Yeah.
that,
And they often
because
turn on
as much
you.
as you care for them, you can't. Yeah, which also actually could be good transition into talking about people
Yeah. How they
reacting
react.
to the way you change, because it's ideally, of course, like when you grow, when you get better, you would want people around you to be happy about it, but it's not always the case. Can you share any, is there like any examples from your experience with like you growing or you healing, and people reacting, or maybe the way you would expect them to react and they don't
Yeah. There's
react the way
one
you
particular
expect them?
person that I'm thinking of. I'm not going to mention her name. Um, but we were like minded. And, um, and it was interesting because as I began to grow, so at the time of our relationship, um, I was a hot mess. I was a hot mess. Um, and she wasn't as much of a hot mess. But what I found out, what I realized later is she's an enabler. She's a wonderful person, but she has a lot of enabling behaviors, which is exactly what I didn't need. I didn't need someone enabling my behavior. I
Mm.
needed someone that was going to call me out. So I started,
Oh, okay, yeah, you
yeah,
needed the
I started
opposite.
calling myself out, right? So I started looking at where I was at, and I definitely wanted it better. And as I began to grow, she started trying to pull me back. She couldn't understand it, and she would actually, we didn't argue. It wasn't arguing, but we would have deep discussions about it, and I could see that we weren't in alignment, and I could see her pushing back, and I was thinking that too. I'm thinking, why are you pushing back on this? Like, this is so great. This is so great. This is,
Mm.
and I didn't understand it, and then as I was moving more in my healing and growing, and she was not, it became actually really distressful. And we're no longer friends anymore because our lives are completely different. But she pushed back really hard on me, and she would, I don't want to say argue because it wasn't, we didn't argue, but she couldn't understand
Yeah,
and would push.
you were just
Yeah, and
different.
she'd push back a lot on me, and I would explain it to her, and she wouldn't get it.
Oh my gosh, I just so know that feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be one of my biggest frustrations. And it's also leading to something that I wrote down that is really, really valuable for people listening to remember, navigating this. So, like, I don't remember the person I was talking to, because I remember I was at grandparents' place, I was thinking about it. And that's when I got this realization. So I would be like really good at communicating, explaining stuff. So like whenever people would ask me like, why are you the way
Oh,
you
yeah,
are,
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of
You
thing,
feel like you have to almost defend you.
I would be
Yeah.
able to explain them. Yeah, like, and like I would be really good at explaining it, because like I feel like I was in a place where I was also like better able to
Yeah.
understand it myself, because I was building that relationship with myself, and I would explain it, and I still like kind of wouldn't get it, and they're like kind of like, what is wrong with you, kind of thing, or like I'm crazy,
Oh,
or
yeah.
I have been called crazy so
Yeah.
many times that like at this point I take it as compliment. Like anybody who calls me crazy, I'm like, oh, thank you. But like there was a time there was a time that I would be so frustrated
Yeah.
about it, and I would be like and for me I would feel like I'm just like a normal
Right.
person and stuff like that, and people call me crazy, and I'm like, but like with
That's funny.
that, so what happened was that as I was reflecting back, because I was thinking like, how can I better explain myself? Like I'm literally thinking on
Because you
how
didn't
can
like the
I better
pushback,
explain it,
right? You
because
didn't
like
like the pushback you were getting from people. Is that what it was?
I think I didn't like the not feeling understood. I think that was
Oh,
the
yeah,
key
yeah, yeah,
piece
yeah.
about it. It's just like, especially like, because I was like, I was really intentional for years. I was like working on the way I communicate. I don't know where it came from, but I would like really study how can I tell things to you in a way where you just can't not
Yeah.
understand it. So that's where I was like, even in school, I was really good at explaining stuff to my classmates, or like to my course mates in like university, because I would literally think on like, how can I explain it where there's no way how you cannot
Mm-hmm.
understand what I mean. And that's where I would like get even more frustrated when people would still not understand me, even if I, after I would explain to them in a way that there's literally no way in my mind how you cannot understand it. I'm literally touching on most of the points that I can think of that I can touch on that might be misunderstood. And even then they're like they still don't get it. And not even get it, get
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it's not even about them judging me for that or not judging. They just didn't understand. So that's step before judging. If you don't understand, you're gonna judge probably anyways because you're like, I
Right.
just don't get it. But it's like if you understand, then it's like, oh, I agree, disagree. But they wouldn't even like
Right.
fully get it what I'm trying to explain to them. So I think it was like that, not feeling
Yeah.
understood. And there was this moment when I was like, and it was such a relief when I was like, it's okay that they don't understand me. I'm just gonna focus on understanding them.
Ooh.
And it was such a
Ooh.
relief because I felt this pressure. Yeah, it
Say
was a
that
big
again. Say
kind
that
of
again. That was really
awakening
good.
moment. So the thought was like, it's okay that pretty much like it's okay that you don't understand me. I'm just gonna focus on understanding you. Because then I take that focus away from me and my frustration about not being understood. And I literally like I would shift that focus on instead of you trying to understand me, I'm gonna try to understand me,
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of thing. And like with that, I also would like learn to manage those expectations where I like for me it's I instead of going from a place of expectation of people understanding me, I just had the expectation that nobody understands me.
And it's
And that's
okay.
fine because then that expectation like yeah, like you don't understand me,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
fine. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
focus on
You
you.
finally get to a point where
um
like I don't expect you to
and
understand me. I just don't expect it.
yeah, and then if I and then I can see people understand, they don't understand, but if they don't understand, it wasn't triggering.
Yeah.
It was like just like a fact. Okay,
Yeah.
they don't understand. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where they stand. And it's different the people that you care
True.
about,
True.
of
True.
course.
That's true.
because because you want them to understand it. That
Yeah.
can be triggering, especially when you think that they
Yeah.
understand you. But like that was something that was really powerful moment for me because then I started to shift that focus away from me being understood to just focusing on the other person.
That's a
And
great shift, though. That is
that was
such a great shift. Holy cow.
I literally felt the
Yeah.
weight lifting. I was like, oh my gosh. And because you get so frustrated and I'm trying to explain and I'm explaining it in 50 ways and people still don't get it. And I'm like, and then I start to think like, what is wrong with
Right,
me?
right, right, right.
Like,
How come I'm not? I've
because
worked
it's so
so
easy to
hard to
go
make
there.
myself clear and they're not understanding me. I totally get that because I felt like I wanted to be understood as well. I get that. That's a big one.
We
Yeah.
all do.
Yeah.
That's the
Because
thing.
that's a trigger
But
back
then
to my
like,
childhood because the abuse happened in the home. And so it's like, is anybody seeing this? Like, is everybody agree that this
oh
is
yeah.
messed up? Like, what's going on here?
And I think another thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't mean that you will never meet any people that understand you. Like for me right now, I'm even impressed that I have more than one
I
person that
understand you.
understand. Like it's so weird.
I totally
Yeah,
understand
exactly.
you.
Like you and I have like another people in my life where there was a point where I was like, and it was like also with that thought that I had, there also came acceptance that I might never meet anybody who understands me. Being
Right.
okay with that, that you walk all your life and there might be not a single person who can
Mm-hmm.
understand you. And that's where like that can feel really lonely if you focus on that. um, and that's where like I wrote down patience. You need to be patient because the right people, they will come in your life, but they might not come in your life on your
Right.
timeline
Right.
that you might want to
Right.
have. They for me, at least I know that for me like I would feel like, oh, like kind of I feel like once you start to be okay with it, that's when
True.
people come in.
True.
It's like when you accept that it's similar to relationships. Like once you have accepted that you might be forever alone and you're okay with it, the right
Mm-hmm.
person comes in because you're not in a place where you
Right. You're
need
not in a
them.
desperate mindset. That's what I find is that,
Yeah.
and I remember being that. Like, I can remember those Friday nights, that transition period that we were talking about, and feeling so lonely. And I just remember trying to
Oh
make
yeah, because then
friends.
your Fridays could like
Oh
trigger
my
that, right?
goodness! So I remember like making great efforts to try to find a friend to fill that Friday night. I
Mm.
was on a mission because I didn't want to be alone. I didn't at that time too. I didn't like being alone because then I got in my own head and I didn't want to be there. So,
Yeah. In that case, it might be helpful, especially if you have some like good people that can give you that safe space or just add to you instead of
right,
taking
right.
away. But even like with that, maybe one thing that you can touch on, I don't know if it was on the list about
No, it
triggers,
wasn't.
because there can be
Oh, you will
triggers,
be triggered.
especially triggers like
Yeah.
to what, but like even to what you just said, that triggers that can trigger your past. So even like with the relationships that you might be letting go, there will be things that will trigger you and be like, oh my gosh, I so
Yeah.
miss that, and maybe I could go
Yeah.
back to that. Even if you know at the higher level it might not be serving you, but there can be triggers that can, similar to like what you said about the Fridays. Those Fridays can trigger that sense of loneliness, even though you might be on the right path, but that can trigger
Hmm.
you to feel bad or to feel lonely. And then step further could be that because you feel that, you're like, whatever, I'm just gonna go back to the old ways because I don't like
Yeah.
how this feels.
I don't know what to do
And
with
then if
this.
especially if you get it
I don't know
every
what to do with
week.
this. Like because that's the
Yeah.
part about transition that's hard is you already know what you're living in and you know your past. You know it. You don't know your future. And sometimes you don't even know your present because I don't
Yeah.
know what's going to happen in a minute. I don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, right? And that is so unnerving and that alone is a trigger.
Can you explain that? Because I feel like it could be transition into another topic.
So
But can you explain it a little
about
more better?
triggering about that transition and being alone.
Yeah.
Well, for me, the trigger was here I am again alone, right? And it just and it was evidence to me of of nobody likes me. So I mean, how I don't know how you want me to explain it exactly. Like,
Okay, I think where I
yeah,
was going with that is that can that uncertainty be a trigger?
yes, yes, because the I know for me, what I was looking for was certainty because I had so much uncertainty,
Mm.
right? And in my life and in my abuse, I never saw it coming. Like I would rarely see it coming. It would come out of the blue. It would catch me off guard. It was always uncertain. I was always walking on eggshells. I was always hyper vigilant looking. So uncertainty was not good for me. And I think that that's true for a
Yeah.
lot of abuse survivors is that uncertainty. And so I think that's what would trigger me. That was the thing that would trigger me is, oh, I'm going into this uncertainty. Okay, so I find this person and go through the whole scenario because I always laid things out in my head, right? I always planned it all out in my head. And what if we become friends and then she hurts me and then she leaves me and it's just I saw this same cycle every time. So it was a trigger. So not knowing what was next was a huge trigger for me. And that, it's interesting that we're talking about that because I'm thinking about that now and that's still a trigger for me. I have to watch that. Uncertainty is still a trigger for me. Um,
It's a trigger
yeah,
for all
it's
of
a, it's
us,
a
I
big
feel,
one. And
because you're,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Because like your brain wants you to keep to be safe.
Yeah,
And that's why like we love routines, because we can, our brain thinks technically it actually can't predict anything because you
you
don't
don't
know
know.
what's gonna happen. But through like those routines, we kind of create that sense of having that
Right.
predictability. But like one thing that like this was a big one for me because I was thinking about it, because there's like so many changes that I have navigated where even like when I moved here, people would ask me like I think 1 or 2 months ago, they're like, how are you like settling in? And I'm like, I was good like the first day. And like
I
I
love
know
it.
one person here like that, and I moved like on 2 months notice. Probably would have been quicker, but it was 2 months. And 2 months just pack everything, move here. And even like with that, that's when I started to think on like, because like somebody told me that I could create like a course on navigating change
Hmm.
or being able to adapt and stuff like that. And that's I haven't ever thought of it as something that I can help with. And when I when I reflected on that, I was like, interesting, because I actually have done, like, even when I moved to UK, I was on a plane for the first time. I didn't know anybody there. Completely new country. Have never been living by myself. And just like get on a plane. And I was in my what is it? I was like 20
Oh my
years old.
goodness. Just a
Yeah.
baby.
And yeah, and even with that, it's like, how did I do that? How did I navigate that?
What was your mindset?
And then even like moving here, I think at that time I was young enough to kind of not young enough and curious enough to kind of be able to deal with it. There was like a lot of things that happened there that were like super
Yeah,
stressful.
I'm sure.
And literally, I would like there would be times that I would be crying like every night.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
thankful for that because like I came out of it like so much. Like there's so much that I learned in like few years living there that probably would take me
Yeah.
decades
Yeah.
living back home.
I was going to say,
If
if you ever
that.
learn, because if you don't put yourself in those situations, you aren't going to learn it. Right.
And a lot of those situations I wouldn't ever even put myself intentionally in
Right.
because like they were like it's
Yeah.
just life. Life was just like, here you go, another one.
They're
Let's
going to
let's
throw
see how
this
you
one at
get
you.
through this one. And I'm and also the fact that like if the fact that I was alone
Yeah.
in country where I
Yeah.
didn't know anybody and you have to navigate stuff literally like thousands of miles away from your family, um, that's another layer that gives you so much
Yeah.
growth
Hmm.
instantly. Um, you can't just like run home and be like kind of ask for help or stuff like that. So like with that was the big one. Then like moving here, even like navigating like now the Ironman or preparing for like half marathon or stuff like that, where those are like big changes for me. For somebody who might be a runner, it's not a
Hmm.
big thing. For me, it's like pretty big. Um, or even like starting my business, things like that. So there's a lot of like transitions that I have gone through where I have gone through them relatively okay, or I haven't been like broken down too much by them. Or before, probably initially I would be breaking down, and then I'm like learning that I can actually get up, which is the main lesson here that I got to that realization. Because I was thinking like, even with moving here, why for me it wasn't like a big deal? Like why is it such a it's like, meh, just moved here. And people are like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
good. Like I'm fine. Like it's why did you even ask me
Yeah.
this? And that's where I started to think on it. And I understood that when it comes to navigating uncertainty, because let's say with this decision, I could come here and it's great experience. And so far it's been great. Or I could come here and it's actually really bad. So there's two outcomes
Hmm.
that can happen, good and the bad, with whatever decision that we make, especially when it comes to change, because with change, you're making decisions that we usually wouldn't. And with that, we can't really predict. And that's where the
Yeah.
uncertainty is coming in. And what I understood about this, it's not as much about decision or the outcome of the decision, but it's about your belief in being able to deal with whatever the outcome. And if I believe that, okay, if I come here, it's a bad experience, I'm gonna find a way, then it makes the making decision
Hmm.
much easier. Or it makes it easier to deal with that uncertainty. And all that to say, it all comes back to your relationship with yourself. Because the more belief I have in myself to be able to handle whatever comes at me, the more able I will be to actually navigate that
Hmm.
uncertainty. Because it's literally like I got myself. I
Hmm.
got myself. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have myself.
Right. I've got my own back.
But it's more like, yeah, and the only way to get to that place is literally to go through experiences where you prove
Right.
yourself that you
Yep.
got your back, that you can navigate this. You can even like with letting go of certain relationships, you can let go of that relationship and you can
Yeah.
survive because your brain is thinking like you're gonna
Yeah.
die if you do this, and you can survive, and not only survive, you probably can
Right.
thrive as well. um, and it just has to go you just have to go through enough like repetition. There's no like shortcuts to that, at least not that I have found. um, but even like with that, it's one thing that anybody listening can do with this, because it can help with navigating that uncertainty, building that belief of things that, or like just yourself or your ability to deal with stuff. You just literally write down a list of all the shit that you have
Yeah.
overcome, and you came out of it, and
Yeah.
you're good. You're still alive. You might not be in a place where you would want to be, but maybe for some of the people listening, the place that you're at right now, some time ago, you might have been just
Yeah.
dreaming about it. So it's just something to, like, if you see how much you actually have overcome, that's when you can start to see that, okay, I have
Yeah.
done all this, and now when it comes to this, based on this, do I think I can actually
Hmm.
find a way, because I have found a way all these times. And and that's where you can slowly start to feed that, because for me that was a really big kind of understanding about it, that I understood it's not about the outcome, because I can't
Right.
predict it. I
Right.
can't know until I have made it. It's about my ability to deal
Yeah.
with that outcome, whatever
Hmm.
it might be. Um, and so far, I have had 100% of success with dealing with it, because I'm still alive and I'm still here.
Okay.
So,
Still moving forward.
yeah. And that's all the proof you
Yeah.
need, really. It doesn't have to be successfully
Right.
dealing with it, because I don't always deal
Right.
successfully. But at the end, I still somehow
Right.
find a way. And that's
Right.
what matters.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I agree.